I'm very much alive right now, and I'm grieving who I was at 32 and before then. And it's been challenging. I'm not going to lie. I'm constantly being like, why can't I get back to being that way? Whatever it is, whether it's carefree or whether it's not being scared all the time. But I would say it's better to kind of deal with it, and whether or not it's slowly or it takes you months or years or however long. Again, there's no timeline on this, but if you don't deal with it, like your shit is always going to catch up to you. And for me, it happened 2 years later.
I'm still grieving the past version of myself. I've never stopped. Grief is always going to be there. It's never going to change. So because, yes, maybe I trying to have a new outlook in life, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have moments or times where I'm literally just in my bed and fucking crying because there's a moment where I just remember something from my past life that I'm like, fuck, I really miss this person.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 3. This is Shauna.
And this is Rosalina, and we're your hosts for Too Young for This Shit podcast. This podcast is not just about boobs, but our journey with cancer. We are young millennials, open about giving you a raw and unfiltered look into our lives. We are in no way medical professionals, nor are we offering medical advice. Any medical references are cited directly from public websites or from our personal diagnosis. Some topics and stories may be triggering to those who are fighting, have fought, or have loved someone with cancer. Hi everyone, this is Rosalina.
And this is Shauna. Welcome back to the Too Young for This Shit podcast. Today we are talking about grief. It can be really easy to get caught up in moving on and moving forward as fast as possible through your journey. And it is so important to kind of stop and reflect on what actually has happened to you and why you feel like you maybe lost the person you were before. So today we're going to just talk about our journeys with grief, what we grieved, and what it offers us.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out, especially with AYAs like myself, Shauna, and anyone else who's listening to the episode, I think it's a unique challenge that we face, especially since being diagnosed at a young age. And we're still in that point of our lives where we're trying to figure out what we want to do for the rest of our lives, whether it's careers, whether it's planning for having a family, or just going through the life of being just a regular person in your 20s or 30s and just wanting to just be the normal person that goes out and have fun and all those things. So I feel like that is especially hard now that it seems like our life has stopped all of a sudden because of this cancer diagnosis. So I think this is a very, very important conversation to have. But before we dive into why grieving is complicated and so forth, let's take you back to season 1 of episode 1 of just where we talk about our lives pre-cancer. So Shauna, discuss 1 to 2 memories and maybe just share what you miss about your pre-cancer life.
I really miss, like, when I stepped into my 30s, I had really felt that I was kind of figuring out who I was. I was a lot more confident, I think, in the choices I was making for myself and the positions like I was putting myself in as far as like relationships or work or I don't know, like how I felt in my life, you know? And I feel like when I got diagnosed, I kind of felt like really, really lost. And then I had to kind of also go back and think about everything that I did want, especially like before my diagnosis, like wanting kids and all of this, make decisions for the future that like I thought I always wanted. And now I feel like after being diagnosed, I don't know what I want really anymore. I don't know if I want kids. I don't know if making big life choices is like the good choice because anything can happen and I'm here today, but you know, who knows what the future holds for me. And I try not to sit in that space, but do I want to buy a house with my partner? And then if I'm not here, that's on him. And I think about things like this all the time. And I was never like that before I got diagnosed. I was always like, oh, I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to buy a house. I want to do all of these things. And now I'm just like a lot more cautious than I was, I think, after my diagnosis. And I like kind of miss, like I've said it in season 1, I've said it in season 2, like just like that carefree person I was without having to always think of all the what ifs.
Yeah, you said it correctly, like carefree. I feel like that a lot of people could really relate to that. And the part that I'm still, I guess, grieving is my life in Seattle. I didn't have a proper closure. I really felt like I grew up in my 20s in Seattle and I went through a lot of hardships, but I also went through like really, really great memories with friends and how I met Brian. So I kind of miss that person who just was very, like you mentioned, Shauna, like carefree. And I think that's the aspect of grieving and just wanting to be not always thinking about cancer all the time and that we're not going to be here. And I think that's like super difficult. I sometimes get into like this space where I'm just tired of always worrying so much. Like I don't want to worry. I just want to live life. And I think it's sometimes hard to do that.
Yeah, like I feel like this diagnosis has prevented me not from moving forward, because I have obviously moved forward in my own way, but I'm just scared. I'm scared of everything. And that was also not who I was before. I always wanted to make safe choices, but I did have like a little bit of a wild side, and I feel like that is just now like completely gone. And that's okay. I just want to say that too. Like maybe who knows what that wild person would have done in their mid 30s now that I'm in my mid 30s, you know? So maybe that's something that kind of needed to stay at 32. I don't want it to prevent me from like living my life. And it is a little bit, I do have to say.
When did you get to the point where you felt like you could start grieving your precancer life? Was it immediate when you found out that you had cancer, or did it just take some time?
No, it wasn't immediate at all. Because I don't think I knew when I first got diagnosed. Like, obviously, I knew my life had changed at that point. I knew that. But I think I was in such a mode of, all right, we have to get all of these things done, right? I need to get through chemo, I need to get through radiation. And then when all of that was done, I had to sit with myself. And I think I was so beyond traumatized that I couldn't I just wasn't there. I was still processing what the year I just had, that I didn't process losing who I was before that diagnosis. So it wasn't until I would say where I started to, I think it was probably June after my exchange surgery. That for me was like June of 2022. Let me just say that. That to me was a real turning point for me. I think for me, that felt like closure of my diagnosis and my reconstruction, and just like closing that book, even though I still have to have some reconstruction. But it felt like for me, that was the checklist that I needed to finish. So that is when I started to just feel better. I felt more confident, I think, a little bit in my body. And then every day, I just kind of felt a little bit more able to process better what had happened to me and give myself that grace and that space to do that.
I'm with you. It wasn't immediate because, you're in that phase of I have to do whatever possible to like fucking save my life.
Yeah, it's like tunnel vision.
Yes, 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 absolutely. I think I started grieving a little after I finished chemotherapy because, as I mentioned in previous episodes, I felt like I lost myself. I completely lost myself when I started to lose hair. That was like a part of my identity. And losing that, I'm like, well, who else am I? And I felt like I just lost everything. And by that point, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I knew at that moment and that time that I needed help. I did have a therapist right when I was diagnosed, and it was perfect because I already had her pre-cancer. I started seeing a therapist in the beginning of 2021, but she was still along the ride with me. And then I started seeing a spiritual coach as well. And I've been seeing her now for 2 years. And she's a big sister to me. I love her so much. And I think she's the person who has really helped me kind of shape me into have like maybe a different outlook in life, or just something to move forward with.
For those that don't know, do you want to just explain what a spiritual advisor does?
Yeah, so essentially, you go in that meeting and you could talk about whatever that is. And she would have the tarot cards and she would mention where you are, maybe your future or what's happening that month. And then, like, we kind of like talk about it. And so that's essentially just what a coach does. And it's funny because so we do a virtual session and she records the sessions, right? But I've never really looked back at the videos. And I think there was a time where I think it was like sometime last year. I saw her in August ish of 2021. And I think that's when I started to see her. But I didn't really started, I guess, maybe the healing process until after chemotherapy. But a year after, in 2022, that's when I saw the video, the first video that I had my session with her. And I remember seeing that this person is, I mean, one, yes, I look very different, but I have such compassion for this person who is literally crying and basically saying that my life is over. I don't have anything else to look forward to. I completely lost myself. And I think the one thing that she mentioned to me is the person who you were before is human, and the person that you are today, you're also human too. You need to kind of think about what are things that you liked about the past version of yourself, and what are things that you didn't like too. And then what are the things that you want to bring into like your new life? And that's how I was able to start thinking about like, oh, I could reinvent myself. I could try to have a different outlook in life, or try to at least. I'm still grieving the past version of myself. I've never stopped. Grief is always going to be there. It's never going to change. So because yes, maybe I trying to have a new outlook in life, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have moments or times where I'm literally just in my bed and fucking crying because there's a moment where I just remember something from my past life that I'm like, fuck, I really miss this person. I think grieving is very complicated, but the point that I'm trying to make is I was just trying to move forward. I was trying to find whatever way works and whatever way that clicked for me. And that moment that clicked was trying to figure out who I wanted to be in this life, in this moment.
Do you feel like you kind of fast tracked yourself into that healing process? Do you think you took your time or fast tracked?
I think I did fast track because if we remember, right when I completed radiation, that's when I was like, all right.
You were on the go.
Yeah, I was like Bugs
Yeah,
Bunny.
you
I
were.
was like Bugs Bunny. But I also made a promise to myself too. And that promise was to get back into dance because I knew that that was the one part that I missed so much. And so if I can bring that back, that would literally fill my heart.
It was something you loved. I think too, for stamina wise, I remember we had an episode where you said you just felt like you couldn't keep up in one of your dance workout classes.
Yes.
I think that in your head, that was probably like hitting a milestone of being like, okay, I'm doing back to doing something I loved pre-cancer, right?
Yeah.
I want to get back to where I'm not out of breath. It's like a sense of who you were before this happened to you. So I see the fast track too of just also just having joy, right? I think we talked about, you said I have nothing to look forward to. It was very, very difficult to find joy after treatment. I think for both of us.
Yes.
I don't want to speak for you, but at least for me, I do think that. The fast tracking though, I don't think I fast tracked. I fast tracked like getting back to my routine more than I did my healing. My goal was to get back to work. And I didn't even realize I was going to have to grieve my old life and like who I was before. And I think that was also like a kind of shocking thing for me of being like, oh shit, now like not only am I like just so traumatized, like health wise, from like a health standpoint, I am so like traumatized as far as having to like now deal with this aspect of healing. It's just like it caught me off guard a little bit. I wasn't prepared for it.
And I think also, I don't know about you, Shauna, but I don't know if you've ever done like any inner child work with your therapist or whatnot. I have, so I don't know if you have, or I don't know if you want to talk about it, but
No, I have.
Okay.
It's funny because I've done some work, but it's not something I consciously think about. I don't think about like young Shauna, you know, I don't think about her. I remember obviously things that happened to me and like how that's carried into my adult life. She's just not somebody like I think about. And maybe that's also why it took me so long to kind
Yeah.
of move forward.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. I think so the reason why I'm bringing up the inner child work, because I mean, I made this up myself, but I think like the work that I was doing with my therapist with that, I mimicked something similar to honoring the Rosalina who found out that she had cancer. I just give myself so much grace in the sense that if there's something that is a trigger for me, I just allow myself to feel, because pre-cancer, I never cried in front of people ever. With Brian, never. I never cried in front of Brian ever. Yeah.
Really?
I would always like hide and like cry to myself because I felt like I was such, I don't know what the word is, but I thought it was like,
It's a sense of vulnerability too, that if you're just not willing to share, that's like, and that's okay. Poor Matt has seen me cry. Like, especially even in the beginning of our relationship, he saw me cry. I was losing my grandma at that time. So he, and very new into dating, kind of got to experience
right.
me dealing with like hardships. And I was always kind of like a highly emotional person. I like love talking
Mhm.
about feelings. I don't know if it's like
I
a
didn't.
good thing or like a toxic trait. I'm unsure
Yeah.
at this point. Truly.
That's funny. Yeah, I did not like to talk about my feelings before. It was very, very difficult for me to even talk about what was going on in my little brain. But yeah, I think like just honoring that person and just allowing myself to feel. I know that crying is like it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't.
It's a release for me.
It is a
Yeah.
release. I just needed to cry it out just so I just get out everything that I need to get out. I feel like that's a healthy thing.
Do you think that your healing journey after treatment has like helped you almost be a little bit like more forthcoming in your feelings?
You mean like what? Like give me an example.
Well, you said you were not an emotional person before cancer.
Yes.
And now, even after, have you cried in front of Brian after your diagnosis?
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah.
Like so many times. I can't even count how many times I just cried. But yeah, I mean, I've allowed myself to cry in front of him. But also I need a specific person to understand like what I need. And of course, I've told him what that is. When I'm crying, I just need you to come and hug me. That is what I need the most.
But I think that that's like an important thing to share with somebody, especially when you are grieving. Like, this is what I need right now, whether that's space, whether it's you need a hug, whether you want somebody to talk you off the ledge. Like, that is you being vocal with Brian, be like, this is really what I need from you right now. Is like, I mean, that was brave, I think, because I feel like, especially when somebody's trying to help you and they don't know how, sometimes it can almost like be like a little infuriating because you're just like, if you don't want somebody talking you off a ledge while you're just wanting to process and be alone. And
Yeah.
sometimes, those people mean well. We've talked about this in survivorship. We've talked about this in the caregiving. Like, we've talked about this in like other episodes, but for you to be like vocal enough to say, listen, like, just hold me. That's what I need from you. Just hold me. I feel like a lot of people don't do that because they don't even know what they need. So like for you to
Yes.
know that this is how I need to process this and what I need from you to process this, that's important.
It took time.
Yeah.
But with the space thing too, there are moments that I'm like, I need space. And I would just go in my bedroom, I just lock the door, and I just sit in my misery. I just need that sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes I just also too, if I'm having like a really bad day, sometimes I just want to sit and watch TV.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes like that is what I need. I need to sit alone and watch TV and just chill because I'll get so worked up over something. Like I need like a baseline of relaxing to kind of help me be able to process why I'm having this hard time. And I've realized that too. Like sometimes I do just need to close the door and just like lay in bed or cry. Sometimes I'll just go in there and cry, but sometimes I just need something mindless, whether it's like Friends in the background that I've seen 1,000 times or Law and Order, which I've seen 1,000 times. Like it's just like,
Yeah.
I know it's
Your
such like that's such like a wild thing to want to watch when you're just like going through it, but here we are. Yeah. So it's just like, sometimes just having that like noise in the background, but then just being still for me is like really, really helpful. Sometimes also too, I'll make Matt just like hold me. And I don't like to cuddle. Like I'm not a big snuggler. So like for him, I'll be like, you have to hold.
Really?
No, I get too hot at night. I'm not
Oh.
about it. Like, I like to hold hands when I walk, and like I am like
Okay,
affectionate in my own
yes.
way. But no, when it comes to snuggling, I just get too hot, and then I feel like I can't move. And I'm like somebody that needs my own bed. Like, I truly,
Yeah, yeah.
that's just like who I am. But like, yeah, like, or on the couch, we all like cuddle, but I'll like, he'll know like when he needs to be like the big spoon.
Yes.
Like, I'll ask
So
him, but like
cute.
sometimes he just knows. I know. But having that person, like you said, that just like knows you and kind of like knows, or can even like get a sense of what you need at that moment is
Yeah.
really nice. I agree. I also just want to circle back to you saying like you went back after your like first spiritual advisor meeting and
Mhm.
listening to or watching the video that you like
Yes.
of your first meeting. So I had a very, very similar situation actually somewhat
Mhm.
recently. So before my grandma had passed away, my grandma passed away in 2014. I saw a psychic medium, and I was just like desperate to kind of figure out how to deal with the fact that like my grandma was passing and I was struggling. And my old boss made me this appointment. She had seen him, said he was like incredible. So she made the appointment under her name. It wasn't my name. It wasn't an email. It was like nothing that this guy could like go and like look me up. So I was like, let's just try it. Like at that point, I was so desperate for, I don't know what I needed. I needed to know what was happening because that's just who I am. And I thought I was going to get some clarity. And I did get a lot of clarity in a lot of different things. But I remember going to see him weeks after my grandma had died. And I was so thick into my grieving of losing my grandma that when I went, I was desperate to have her come through. I just like needed to know she was okay. And I like needed to figure out how like to start to process and move forward, you know, with losing her. And I recorded the session. And I recorded my first session with him like 6 months prior, but I recorded the session. I remember leaving and I felt really, really good. But then I went back a couple years ago, actually. So I went back and I listened to the recording. I hadn't listened to it in probably like 5 years. And I just heard how like broken I was. Like you sort of heard you were saying like you felt like you were hopeless, right? Like you had nothing to look forward to. This like I got to hear just like how thick, thick, thick into my grieving I was. I felt so sad for myself. Like I knew it was bad, but like when you have the kind of when I've processed it and I didn't realize like how much I was struggling in that sense in the beginning. And you said like you had so much compassion for yourself. I think that was the most compassion I've ever had for myself in my life is after listening to that recording.
Same. Mhm.
And like again, whether it's grieving yourself or grieving a loved one, I think after I lost my grandma, I kind of again tried to fast track healing. I got a new job. I went back to the city. I was in this new relationship with Matt. Like I was really trying to pretend I was okay. And then it took a couple of years and then Matt and I took a break and I then had to grieve my relationship, but then all the other grief that I had not processed. And it came like crashing down on me so hard that I was like not a functioning person. Looking back, I probably like could have been hospitalized. I like wasn't eating. I couldn't function at work. I was crying all the time. I was just like a shell of myself. And I would say like similar to how I kind of felt after getting out of treatment of just being like, I don't even know what just happened. I was just like a person, at least I was like functioning post treatment. Like this, I wasn't even like I wasn't functioning. I couldn't. I had to take 2 weeks off from work where like for one of those weeks, I just laid in bed. Like it was horrible. It was probably the saddest I've ever been in my whole life. And again, this was like a solid 2 years, I think, after or almost 2 years after like my grandma had passed that it took me to deal with that.
I think you bring up a good point. You thought that you were okay. You didn't really, I guess, allowed yourself to have that moment to actually grieve. And then it caught up to you. Someone could relate to that now, where maybe they're feeling the same way, dealing with cancer and not being able to allow themselves to grieve. So, what advice would you give someone who's in that position?
I think that honestly, healing can be like really uncomfortable. Honestly, I didn't want to be uncomfortable. I didn't want it to like derail my life. I just wanted to power through. I think maybe if I found joy, it was going to trump the grief in a way. That isn't the case. And I do think that like sitting in the uncomfortability sometimes is kind of worth it. Just like to, as much as you don't want to be uncomfortable, like having to feel everything, right? Having to force yourself to process what's happening and in your own way. It doesn't have to be like through a therapist. It doesn't have to be through like constantly having to talk about it all the time. It's like small steps, like maybe reading a book about grief. Like that was the one thing during that really, really hard time in my life. I had gotten a therapist and she had said to me, all of my grandma stuff had come up, but I was also like mourning my relationship with Matt. And she had said to me, she's like, you're mourning somebody who's very, very much alive. And that's like really, really difficult. And I didn't even realize that. And for me, that grief was harder, I think, than having to grieve my grandmother at the time. And I think that that is very similar to how I'm feeling right now. I'm very much alive right now, and I'm grieving who I was at 32 and before then. And it's been challenging. I'm not going to lie. I'm constantly being like, why can't I get back to being that way? Whatever it is, whether it's carefree or whether it's not being scared all the time. But I would say it's better to kind of deal with it, and whether or not it's slowly or it takes you months or years or however long. Again, there's no timeline on this, but if you don't deal with it, like your shit is always going to catch up to you. And for me, it happened 2 years later.
Yeah. And I think also because there will be times, and I think you mentioned this, Shauna, that like you're crying almost like every day. And I'll definitely say that when I was grieving, I was essentially crying mostly every day. And I don't know, it's when I'm listening to music and I'm listening to a specific type of music, I just cry because it reminds me of what I dealt with. And I think that we have to give ourselves that moment too of thinking back, remembering what I went through. I mean, it's not a common thing that everyone goes through cancer. Even though you went through treatment and maybe you're completed with that and you're in quote unquote remission, there's always like a time to grieve. And I think you need to just sit there and understand what about your past self are you still wanting, or what is something that is still not fulfilled.
So I think it's also like important to mention like how much other grief, I think, like things that you've grieved in the past can kind of pop up sometimes. You know, like I've shared on here that I lost my grandmother, but I do love talking about her. It's probably why I've brought her up in this episode because I love it. It's been like healing for me to talk about her. But I remember, now I'm going to cry on the podcast. And I just remember when I got diagnosed, I don't have a relationship with my mom. And I very much didn't want one after being diagnosed. I didn't once be like, oh, I wish my mom was here, or like I felt like I needed my mom. But I really felt that way with my grandma. I remember getting that news and then being like, I wish my grandma was here, you know, because that was my person. That's who I wanted with me, you know, and it was like already a hard time of going through this. And then my grief kind of crept up into my diagnosis. I think it happened again too. Like I think I woke up from surgery and I think I was like crying for my grandma at one point. And that's sad. It's sad to like go through the worst time of your life and not have the one person. And don't get me wrong, my family was great. Matt was really great. Matt was the best. But you know, I did wish that she was there with me going through this with me because it's just like a comfort. Okay, I'm gonna stop crying now. But
Yeah, as I say, like you lived with her too.
I lived with her for 5 years. I took care of her.
That like bonding moment together.
Yeah,
that
and
like
it was my whole
you
life.
don't have with anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, it was my whole life with her. She was just like my girl. I didn't realize it until we were discussing topics for this episode. But like it does, like your grief can creep into other parts of your life that you were grieving, which obviously makes it challenging, but it's okay. It's okay for me to say like I miss my grandma, you know, and I wish she was here. So it just kind of like goes to show that this is not something that you just get over. I have really good days, you know, where I could talk about her and not cry, unlike today, but then there's days where like I'll think about her and I'm sobbing and I need the minute, you know? And like you said, like you've had this in survivorship of like mourning your old self. I've had very hard moments of doing the same. And it might carry through with us for our entire lives.
Well, that's what I mentioned in the beginning of this episode is especially as AYAs, our life just stopped all of a sudden. And we didn't get the chance to really do the things that we wanted to do pre-cancer, right? We still had a life to look forward to. And I feel with cancer, then all of a sudden that stopped.
Definitely.
But
I agree.
let's talk about moving forward or like even finding acceptance with this. So Shauna, like, you know, did you feel like it was possible to find a true closure with having cancer? Have you tried to move forward?
I feel like I feel like I'm going to just forever be in my healing journey from this. I think I don't know if it's closure that I would say, but it's acceptance. I've accepted that this has happened in my life. I've accepted that I had some bad cells and had a tumor and had breast cancer. Like I accept all of that, but I just don't know if I'm going to one day wake up and be like, all right, I'm good. I feel like I got the closure I need, and I'm just going to continue on with my life. I am going to continue on with my life. I just don't think that there's going to be like a day or a time where I'm going to know that that closure is here. And that might never come for me, but at least I have the acceptance, and the acceptance is what's helped me be able to move forward.
You can't change that you had cancer.
Right. I feel like I just got like really like preachy. Like that's like the accept the things I cannot change. I am a little bit of a control freak in my own way, and I like to be in control, especially in my own life. In order for me to gain any sense of control, that acceptance had to be there. And it's been really helpful, I think, to phrase it in that sense for myself, because if I'm looking for closure, I feel like that's just going to be something that I'm desperately searching for and going to try. It's just going to be like a really exhausting effort that I just don't feel like I'm ever going to reach. I'm not saying that I'm ever going to. I might not. Let me rephrase that too. But that acceptance for me is like how I'm able to live my life moving forward. And how about you, Rosalina? Do you think you'll ever have like that closure?
So when we talk about closure, the one thing that I think about is how I didn't have a proper closure when I left Seattle. Basically, I packed my bags and I left. I didn't tell anyone. People knew that I was moving to Los Angeles, but they didn't, like my friends didn't know when I was moving to Los Angeles. And then I got hit with a cancer diagnosis and I fucking just disappeared. I didn't tell anyone. And most of my friends like found out when I posted the video of me ringing the bell for chemotherapy. So I didn't tell anyone because I just wasn't ready to. And so 2 years, I'm still finding myself needing some sort of closure with that chapter. There were many times where I was trying to go to Seattle, but just something always comes up. But I booked a flight to go to Seattle in November. I wanted to go in the summertime because that's the best time, but I'm going in November and Brian wants to come with me. So I was like, okay, fine, you come with me. But I told him, I was like, I'm warning you, I'm probably going to just cry the whole trip.
Did you want to do it solo?
Yes, I want to do it solo, but he wanted to come with me. So, I mean, that's totally fine. I just wanted to warn him.
Yeah.
It's like,
Hey.
like
It's your disclaimer before the
there's
trip.
gonna be a lot of emotions. There's gonna be a lot of emotions. But I'm a big hockey fan. And when Seattle got a hockey team right after I left, and I'm so bummed out, but I really want to see the arena and how it's built because I lived around that area. So it would be super cool to just see that, see how different it is. I booked a flight to see a hockey game for the Seattle Krakens, and I'm seeing the game on my cancerversary. So November 16th.
Maybe this is the closure. Like that game happened to be on your cancerversary. Like that
Yeah.
game didn't have to be.
True.
Could have been another day. But I don't know.
Right,
Maybe
right.
just like you being there, it's something that you want to do. And it's on obviously a day that you will celebrate.
Yes.
And I don't know. It just, to me, that's kind of like a sign. Maybe that will be the closure you need.
Yeah, I could see that. Also, for that month in November, all the hockey teams participate in Hockey Fights Cancer. So that is the only time I'm going to represent myself as a cancer survivor. Usually I don't want any attention with that. And I usually don't like to say that I'm a cancer survivor. But that day, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to have like a big like sign or something, but I really want to be like known as like a cancer survivor. And I'm celebrating 2 years. Hopefully I'll get there because I'm having an ultrasound exam in September. So hopefully that's like clear. But anyways, yeah. So I'm just trying to find closure with that part of life and just giving myself grace too. I don't know within one trip I will have that closure. I'm just kind of keeping it open and seeing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like my life in Los Angeles. I love my life in Los Angeles, but something about Seattle and all the memories is what I cherish so much. So I think just going back and just seeing everything and walking around and all those things just would bring up just, I think, happiness and maybe some sad moments too. I came upon this model of grief that's created by Dr. Tonkins. So, kind of think about that grief is a black circle in the middle. It doesn't get smaller, it doesn't get bigger. And then think of a rainbow because I really love colors. So think about like you're like drawing around different colors around that. And essentially what the model is that grief still stays the same. It's still painful and it's still very present. But what happens is that with that circle of grief, we grow around that grief through new experiences, maybe meeting new people, pursuing new activities. So that's the visual aspect of growing around your grief. Even when I think that I am moving forward, there will be times where there's like a trigger or I remember like a memory that I'm still grieving. And I think that we never stop grieving.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I like this model because I think some people are better like visual learners. And I feel like I'm one of those people. Like when I picture that little black circle and just like how as time like grows and grows and grows, but that little black circle is still there. And I just when you see, we're gonna provide the link in our show notes, but it's just like I don't know, to see it, it makes so much sense. Hearing it
It
obviously,
does.
and people talk about like as time like it's gonna get easier, but it like doesn't go away. To see it though is a different outlook for me.
Oh, definitely. And I think kind of going back to finding acceptance, when I mentioned, I think it was episode 1 of season 3, the phrase, oh, you're so young. And I mentioned that it's not a trigger for me anymore. I think that's when I realized that I'm finding acceptance that this did happen in my life and I can't do anything about it. Essentially, like I need to fucking move forward and do the best that I can and trying to live the next 40 years. I think that's when I finally found a moment where I'm like, okay, this happens and I just have to live with it.
Well, just I think if you didn't imagine like just staying still, imagine like just how awful you felt like after treatment and stuff. I feel like that you'd be that same person with just not looking forward to anything or not having that joy and then kind of being stuck in a place of just grief.
But also feeling angry too, because I was very angry, like to the point where I was and I think this is just a part of processing. I remember when I was diagnosed and then going outside and walking past different people. And I'm like, okay, well, how come I'm the person that has cancer, but none of you have cancer? I was really angry and I hated, I hated everyone. Like, I'm not going to lie. I hated everyone and I felt it was so unfair. But I moved past that like stage because I wanted to move forward. I needed to do the healing work that is needed to not think that way anymore because I knew that was a very, very toxic mindset to have. I did not want to be that person. I didn't want to hate everyone.
I think I had that too. I think anger obviously is like normal after, I mean, that's like, it's a stage of grief for anybody who wants to look up the 7 stages of grief. It's a stage. And I didn't realize that until like after I had already experienced the anger and then was dealing with the 7 stages of grief through my therapist. And I was like, oh, that actually does kind of make sense. Like that being angry is kind of part of it. It's okay. And then, I think I had like a brief moment of like, I hated everyone too. I hated that everyone's lives were moving forward while mine was staying still. And then I felt like when I was able to move forward, I was staying still a little bit too. So it was, I don't know, it was hard. It's hard also when everyone around you has like these great things happening. I've said this in season 1. It's hard not to feel like jealous that people get to not have to deal with the shit that we've dealt with. And the anger is like a totally normal part of that healing process for sure.
And to cap off this episode, in the beginning, we talk about episode 1, season 1, and our life before cancer, what we missed, what were the memories. And I would like to cap it off with our life after cancer. Shauna, how has your perspective changed and what new perspectives have you gained? been 2 years
It
now,
has been
right?
2 years.
Being diagnosed with cancer. Yeah.
This is going to sound like so cliche, but I guess it's more of just like maybe not taking shit for granted. Everyone I think has this stigma of like getting older, right? Like we're young and then you get old, and it's like almost like a negative thing. But now I kind of look at like every birthday that I have as like a privilege. It's like a privilege to get older. And I think that that's like
100%.
a great,
Absolutely.
it's honestly, that's been like a really great thing because I don't fear getting older. I don't fear that. So that's been like a really great perspective change for me. I have this new perspective of like kind of like not giving a fuck about small stuff. And even sometimes the big stuff, like again, it's like if something is out of my control, it is what it is. And I think it kind of feels like I don't have a reaction to anything anymore. And it's like that can very well be a trauma response, but it's also just like, I don't know. I feel like I'd rather put my energy into so many other things. I used to be somebody that used to react to everything. I used to have these big feelings and I just always was over. I mean, I still am a big overthinker. I don't want anybody to think that all of a sudden now I just don't give a fuck about anything. I have to just maybe preface that because I'm scared of everything still. I have major anxiety. But I used to have really big reactions. And now I think it's like, once I realize how much energy it takes to lose my shit, I don't have it in me anymore. So it's just kind of, it's been like really great to figure out how to just channel energy into things that actually matter and to things that I can't change. So I think those have been like my two like biggest perspective changes that I find that have been so positive for me. And what about you? What's been like your major perspective changes, you think?
I think the one big thing is having compassion for others of what other people are going through with their life, whether it's like big or small. And I think in the past, like I didn't really understand. For example, like my mother, like her mom died at a really young age and my mom still grieves about her. And so at a young age, I never really understood why my mom couldn't move. Sorry, this is very harsh, but like move on. And now I have like a different perspective as to she's never going to move on. She's always going to grieve. And I think that is the biggest thing, is like just having compassion for others. I think that's a lesson that I learned from having cancer. I think that is definitely the one big thing. But another thing that gave me like a new perspective is doing things that your old self wouldn't do. And I really love that because there were things before that I always wanted to do, or like never really thought that I could do those things. And now I have a new perspective that I'm like, if I want to do that, I'm going to do it. I don't have anything to lose.
Right? Like, fuck
that's
it.
essentially like what I think about. Yes, that's it. Like I have a no fucks mentality. That is essentially
what
I thrive on.
That's what, we're just going to call it that, because I think that that's like where I don't want to say, it sounds like I don't give a shit. Like, I don't know. It just sounds like so dismissive, but it's like, it's more of like a no fucks given. Like, shit's going to happen, right? Like, what are we going to do?
Yes. And so why not just do things that you've always wanted to do, or do things that your past self was scared to do? And you're like, no, I'm going to do it because I'm just trying to live. I'm trying to live the life that I still have. So I think if you're scared to do something, maybe think about doing it. Maybe this is your sign.
Thanks for the science. That's empowering as fuck. I like that. Let's end on that note. A very special thanks to our podcast producer, Bethany Allard, and our podcast editor, Ayla Anderson.
Thank you all for listening and supporting our podcast. Sharing our stories with you has been incredibly healing for both of us, and we hope it helps other women in their journeys through breast cancer.
Ladies, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and fellow breasties. Help us reach more women by subscribing and rating us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now on YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram at TYFTS Podcast and email us at tyftspodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys, so shoot us a message. We will link any resources from the episode in our show notes.